And now I think we should be live. People should be hearing and seeing us. So
Feels like it.
anyway, hey everybody, I'm Evan Abrams. Welcome to Motion Design Hotline. If you're just jumping in, this is where we're going to be dispensing some motion design help to your problems. So give them to us live, put them in the chat. If you're hanging out with us in the chat, please let us know where you're from, let us know who you are, and most importantly, what your problem is, because we really like to help out. We're kind of the Fraser Crane of this thing. So I'm joined here as usually by Kyle Hamrick, as you can see here in the two shot. And Kyle is known for going places and speaking to people. Kyle is known for beard growth. Kyle is known for puns. Kyle, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I mean, aside from those things you mentioned, being bearded is definitely one of my primary characteristics. I've been doing After Effects for something like 15 years now, doing training for almost half that. And doing wacky live shows like this for one whole week now.
That's right. We're on episode 2, Kyle. We've survived. We've survived our pilot episode. I made a lot of oopsies in that one. Now we've come here to the second one where we did other oopsies at the beginning. You really want to show up for the start of the show because that's where we just do it bad. Yeah. So in the show, like I said, bring us your questions, your quandaries, hit us up in the chat. You're going to be able to have a look at, our various After Effectsies as we try to solve them live. But at the end of last stream, those of you who don't know, we archive all the streams on here, and we've got a bunch of show notes for what went down in that particular show. So all of that is available at the link in the description, thanks to our show's sponsor, Milla Note, who give us these wonderful kind of virtual boards where we usually use them for pre-production. Kyle, you and I use them to basically design this entire show and figure out what we're doing. And we also use it to collect all of your quandaries. So even if we don't get to them in one show, we will get to them in a future show. And to show you I'm serious, we're going to get to one of those right now. One that we missed.
He's extremely serious, folks, just so there's no doubt.
Where's my camera? Is this my camera? I'm serious. So we are going to dive into, in the last episode, this was Harley Pan. They were asking, basically they wanted to make a rectangle that expanded, contracted, and moved around and had things kind of stick on the rectangle, right? And this is a sort of thing we can solve with some expressions, and we're gonna get to that as soon as I manage my windows better here and get everything organized. So let's see, we've got a chat here. Now we're going to kick it over to Evan's screen. So now you can kind of see, this is that Milla Note thing we talked about. This was our question from last time, animating, expanding rectangle, keyframing the scale. How do I snap a shape onto the edge? That was kind of the question that they were trying to get into. And the example they showed, I don't know if anyone's ever seen Big Story, but it's sort of this great series. They have wonderful motion graphics. I love their titles. But basically, there's going to be a rectangle, and it's going to expand. So if we go into the old After Effects, there were two kind of methods that jumped out to me as to how we might do this. The first one is we can use scale. If we're scaling something, we can certainly have another object basically ride on the edge of another using scale. When we call up the keyframes, only the keyframes, I'm only keyframing the scale, and everything else is along for the ride. So how do we make this happen? Well, the first thing is that this circle is parented to the rectangle. Under normal circumstances, that means that if we scale the rectangle up and down, let's turn off this fancy expression, if we're scaling that thing up and down, the thing that's parented to it is certainly staying in the position we want, but it is not doing what I want. Scale-wise, it's getting squished also, and that's not what we want. That's not the look. But by using a fairly complex mathematical expression, we're able to basically negate the scale of a parent, right? So I don't know if anyone out there is a parent. Kyle, you're a parent. And yes, as all parents know, children do exactly what you tell them all the time, right?
Every time.
Yeah, all the time. Just like in After Effects, if you are the parent of something, the child does what you're doing nonstop.
And that fact should be apparent.
Oh boy, we're gonna just my beeping button is broken today. I will save you from Kyle's puns momentarily. But so this expression that we've kind of put on here, this variable s equals parent.transform scale /100, is basically saying, hey, this scale, we're going to create a variable, and that variable called s, is equal to the scale of the thing it's parented to, this thing called rectangle, and then we're going to divide that by 100. So that means that when the scale is 100, s's value is 1, right? And if the scale is going up or down, that percentage is going to change. Then this large line of code here is saying, value 0 divided by s's value 0. And we're talking about, when we say this little in square brackets here, that's the first part of this scale, because it's a two-part thing. The first argument, the first part of that property is the 0. So we're taking the value 0 divided by s's value 0. And that little bit of math basically works the scale backwards so that it's not happening. So as this one scales, this one is scaling the inverse, and you can see that value going up and down like that. So that's if we were to do this with scale, which is totally fine, right? And if you want to use scale, that's great. But what jumped out to me out of this question was, well, why are we even using scale at all? If we want a rectangle to get bigger and smaller, we can just make a rectangle get bigger and smaller. We don't necessarily need to scale it, which brings us to the size method, we would say. So here in the size, what we're doing is we are just going to adjust. We're just going to adjust the size of this thing. So the size of this rectangle is going to change to get larger and smaller, right? Which is wonderful because the size is giving us the number. So this is 280 pixels big. So we could just set an expression here on the position of this circle that we've parented to the rectangle. And when you parent one thing to another, their values become relative. So with these two things, if I were to set its position to 0, 0, then it's right here. This is at 0, 0 of this layer. So if I were to somehow add in half of 280, half of the distance here, it would end up right there. So I set up a variable of the height, which is going to be equal to that. And then I put in this little variable here for a modifier, because we need to modify that thing that we're putting in. So what happens is we're going to multiply that height by negative 0.5, which will put it there. But you could change this modifier to be something like negative 0.6, which will put it there. Or it could be sort of any number, depending on the relationship you want these two things to have. Which kind of brings me to the overarching thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the idea that expressions are just describing a relationship between two things. So when the question asker came in to say, I need to change the position of an object based on the scale of another, that means that I want to set up a relationship between scale and position, or a relationship between size and position. And then we can start to work backwards into figuring out, well, what do we have to do to massage one to become the other? How do we get those to fit? It's also an excuse for me to put in my favorite Royal Tenenbaums meme, which is my theory presupposes that maybe it's not. So that's kind of where I came at this from. But Kyle, you had some different thoughts. We'll just get Kyle in the mix now. That's here.
True. Yeah, I personally, I really love expressions, and I use them all the time, and I teach them to people, hopefully somewhat effectively on occasion. But I know not everyone is down with that, or quite at that place yet. So I assembled a couple of tools that I find really handy for this kind of stuff. So I thought I would just kind of showcase those real quick. All
right.
First and foremost, there's a tool called Rigged Box by Paul Slemmer. And I'll do a quick demo of that one in After Effects, because I think it kind of kicks this off nicely. And so let's see. I'm going to create just a rectangle here, rectangle shape layer. And I assume most of you know, you can open this up, and now you've got these size sliders, and you can unlink it and do that. And you can keyframe this, but it's a little hard to work with, especially if you're trying to match it in one direction. Jake says my mic is hot, by the way. H-O-T, hot, hot, hot.
Oh boy, I'm gonna bring your audio down. Ooh, maybe this will calm your mic down.
So this is, certainly fine, and you can do all kinds of expressions in here. But if you're not looking to do those yourself, there's a really handy tool called Rigbox. You can see I've been using it for a couple versions here. And it just creates its own group here that gives you a shape that's all rigged up with some expressions of its own here already. And then it gives you what's called a pseudo effect controller right here. That'll give you the X and Y size. So you can just work those right here. And you can set, the thing that I like the best about this is that you can set the anchor really easily. So if I wanted it to always be sizing from like one corner or one side or something, then that is what it's good for. It just makes everything a little bit more accessible. So again, that's Rigbox by Paul Slemmer. I think it's technically free, but there's a suggested donation, which you should do. He also has another tool right here called Light Beam that does similar kind of connection sort of stuff. It's basically a beam preset, so you should check that out. If you're looking for something even a little bit more robust, I think I saw Sergey in here, someone from Ukramedia. Ukramedia has a thing called Smart Rect, which is similar to Rigbox, but it has a much more robust interface, and it kind of allows for snapping of your anchor points and stuff like that. So I would definitely recommend checking that out as well. And then for an even more robust solution, there is Pins and Boxes from Mamo World that you can get on AE Scripts. And it has all kinds of like really dynamic linking that you can do. You can select multiple objects and just kind of click create, and it'll create like pins around those things that can, follow along. So it's kind of a matter of how in depth you want to get with your rigs and how much you already know about expressions and rigging. So hopefully some of those are useful.
Now, Kyle, could I tempt you to show us one of them perhaps in some real live use here?
Well, I do not have either Smart Rect or Pins and Boxes installed because I do a lot of my own expressions writing.
No, that's true. Because
like
a lot of the time, I'll just say this about plugins in general, guys. I know a lot of people are pro plugin, and so am I, right? Sometimes they are heavier than you need. I'll say that. Like, I get this question about plugins specifically when it comes to things like Duic, where people are I need to make this character. Do I need Duic? I'm like, well, what does your character even do? Right? You're filling your timeline with 100 expressions. That's not super helpful. So, anyway,
yeah, it depends on what you need and sort of what level of solution you do.
Yeah, and how much.
Sergey says he's sending me Smart Rect.
That's why we do this show, Kyle. We do the show so that people will send us objects for us to enjoy. That's that's part of the deal.
I mean, riggable rectangles come up all the time, so it's definitely a thing that is always relevant.
You almost always require text in a box, or a box with something in it, or a thing that responds to another thing. If you can cut down the number of keyframes you make in half, then that's fantastic. Cool. So that's our first kickoff question done. We nailed it. We've had some questions in the chat, but keep them coming at us. We're gonna fill up our Milla Note board with them so that we can collect them and try to answer as many of them as we can in the program. But speaking of Milla Note, this is the point in the program where we thank our sponsor, Milla Note. Milla Note, they create a pretty wonderful web application for taking care of things like the pre-production process, doing your storyboards, your style frames. It's perfect for collaborating with people. Kyle and I are collaborating right now. We can see, if we go to my screen, we'll see Kyle and I collaborating literally on this thing. See, we've collected people's questions right here. We're going to get to them. But, I usually use it for collecting a lot of things on various projects. So when I'm getting tasks figured out and checking them off, This is a great place to work out things like a visual script. It's a great place to work out things like style frames. Get them organized, send them to people, and start making your pre-production process a little bit more productive. So that's our thanks to our wonderful, generous sponsor, Milla Note. And
Thanks.
now, Kyle, I want to know, this is before we get into the stuff, do you have any things to plug?
Well, I should probably plug some of my upcoming appearances. And on our little pre-show chat, I neglected to remember one that is actually happening on Monday. It's only relevant if you're in Kansas City, though.
Right.
But if you want to grab my screen real quick, I'll show you this. So I will be talking at KC Design Core. I run a sort of the sister group, KC Video Core, where we meet monthly and talk about video stuff. But I will be talking at the KC Design Core meeting, which is, we're effectively combining them for both of our groups. And I'll be talking about the Illustrator to After Effects workflow. So if you're in Kansas City or somewhere very close, come see us. It's free. There's that. I will also be speaking at the Keyframes conference in November, along with several other super awesome and much more talented people than me. Sounds like my mic might still be hot, apparently. I'll just back off a little bit for now. And then next week, I will be at Blend. I'm just attending. I'm not cool enough to be speaking there or anything. However, I have helped to organize a silly pre-party along with a fine gentleman named, let me make sure I pronounce this right, Brad Eustathius, who kind of took the initiative to create a Facebook event on the School of Motion group, and then that sort of spiraled into, if you are coming to Blend Thursday night after the Giant Ant event, you can join us at Pub 340 for pinball and karaoke and general silliness.
Oh yeah, I don't mind giving Pub 340 a plug on this program. That's it's a great bar. You're gonna enjoy it. Pinball rooms are a little bit small, but they also do a lot of great live music and stuff there. So definitely check them out. All right, sweet. Well, Kyle, plug section over. It's time to get into the questions.
The meat.
The reason why we're here. And anyone if anyone else is also going to the Blend, find each other in the chat, find each other in real life. It's an amazing thing that is too cool for Evan to go to for reasons, mostly travel related reasons, because it's prohibitively expensive to travel across Canada. But yeah, it's a good time. So, what do we got here in our question pile, Kyle? We've got. If I want.
Well, there is one very important one.
Yeah,
I'll
which
answer Matthew's question real quick.
Yeah.
He asked if I had to be Kylosaurus Rex in a Jurassic Park movie, would it be 2 or 3? I mean, I don't feel like either of those answers are particularly appealing, but I guess 2.
Is that the Lost World?
Yeah. I'll take 2, but without the part where the T-Rex gets brought back to San Diego.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think, Kyle, your camera, your audio maybe keep getting resetted. I don't know. We're gonna find out.
I don't know.
All right. Well, it's a bother. Anyway, we'll figure it out. Okay. So, meanwhile, let's get to some real questions.
Yes.
We've got Zac Efron on here. I'm gonna really fail at pronouncing anybody's name always, but I want something to move from left to right, fast in the beginning, slow down, and then go fast again. How can I do this in After Effects? Well, my first thought is that we jump into the graph editor to make that happen. Kyle, what do you think about this situation? So basically, this is a pretty standard thing. We want a thing to move from one side of the screen to the other, and we want to describe its motion in some way. Lay it on me. What jumps into your head right away?
Well, I mean, that definitely looks like the way that I interpret the question makes me think that this person is probably not too familiar with how the graph editor works. Right. So it might be time for a nice little quick tutorial on that.
Let's take a refresher here.
So I'm just going to bust out a little 200 by 200 solid. I'm going to push this one up to the top, make a duplicate, and push this one down here, because what we're going to do is is kind of have our control here, and then we'll have our experiment.
Okay.
So I'm going to open up these position properties, and then I'm going to go ahead. I should have done this before I duplicated, but here I am. I'm going to separate my dimensions because the way that position works, you can certainly do this, and you can work with these in the graph editor, but it's a little clunkier because you're dealing with both X and Y. So I'm going to undo that and separate my positions, which you can get by right-clicking right here. Or if you have K-bar like me, you can get a handy little button that does it. Ding. And so now I'm going to grab both of these. Let's push them over here. Keyframe our X position, go up to like here. Move them over. That's probably a pretty good speed. Yep, beautiful. I might even go just a little bit less. Get zoomed in here. There we go. Okay, so up top, we're going to keep this as our linear. And then down on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and just easy ease this with F9. And so you can already see a difference where we're kind of, getting a little bit of variance in the speed. If we open this up in the graph editor, you can see this straight line is the linear one. It goes from, here, let me even scoot these over a little bit so you can kind of see it stopped. This is representing the change of these values. It's a constant value, and then all of a sudden it starts changing at a constant rate, and then it goes back to being a static value, okay? Whereas with the eased one, you can see it kind of eases into that, and then it goes up, and then it eases back to where it's a still value again. And you can grab these handles by just clicking on them, and, ooh, I'm messing with the top one now. Oh, yeah, I got these switched around. That's okay. Let's do that. So the red one, just change this real quick. By the way, I hate working with solids. So the red one is linear, and that'll be our constant, constant speed.
What are you dumping on solids for? Jeez.
Because they're clunky and hard to change easily. I much prefer shape layers. But this seemed to make sense here. So you can see by just tweaking these handles a bit, you can start really changing up the way that this looks. Maybe you want it to really ease into that change and then go kind of fast and then end kind of quickly.
Yeah, because our, like our producer, Zekafron here, is saying we gotta start slow. No, sorry, fast in the beginning,
fast, and then slow in the middle,
and then fast again.
It would actually look like this.
Yeah.
Because what I was doing a second ago, starting slow, fast in the middle. But if you want to go fast, you want to kind of pull it up like this. And just to point this out, I am currently on the value graph. You can also look at the speed graph, which will represent the actual speed that you're moving.
Which now looks pretty wacky.
It does. So right now you can see we're going from this static value, and then it's going to start changing very quickly, level off to almost stop in the middle here, and then zoom back out, and then so we'll have these very abrupt stops like that. So hopefully that is a good sort of quick and dirty explanation of what's going on here. I think the best way to really see how this works is to do something like this, maybe make 3 or 4 copies like this, and just kind of tweak these handles so that you can kind of see how they compare and contrast with each other. And that starts giving you a really good idea of how this works and like how extreme the changes are going to look. And pretty soon, if you get some experience on this, you will generally kind of know how it's going to feel just by the way the curve looks. And you don't even need to preview it every time so much.
Yeah, that's kind of a level of let's say intuition that really comes with experience. So hopefully that answers the question. The big thing I would say is open up the graph editor and get comfortable with that value graph, because I mean, and we're seeing it in the chat. There's a lot of people in the chat who have a lot of shade to throw on the speed graph, which is that's fine. Not everyone loves it. It's just multiple ways of expressing the same data, right? If that makes sense. And
there are times when one's useful, times when the other one's useful.
Yeah, Kyle, that's a pretty natural segue into our next question. This is why I'm the producer on the program. We've got a question here from Picaro 24.
JC.
Yeah. When you get familiar with expressions, I'm not gonna try to do an impression of JC. When you get familiar with expressions, you can easily fall into the trap of using them all the time. When do you do something you could have done with expressions, and how do you make that decision? Basically, where's the break-even point on expressions v keyframes, W/R/T? When are you saving time? When are you wasting time? I don't want to say I don't know. It's really hard because it's a case-by-case kind of basis. If you're evaluating based on time, then you're running into this idea of, how long do you do a thing? And let's say we have to put 10 hours into an expression-based solution to a thing, but it's never going to be repeated. We're never going to replicate this thing. If it is bespoke, it's only going to happen once. Maybe just keyframe this thing, right? That's the hard part to understand. But understanding the value of expressions and where that goes, I think some of it is fairly invaluable. So you talked about some kind of plugins and scripts at the start. Your things like your rigged boxes, your light beams. These are things that may have had their genesis as trying to solve something with expressions as opposed to with keyframes, right? So then they went on to create something with those that was beyond the project it was used in. So I think that's maybe one of the areas where expressions excels. It's a very different way of thinking about the world, but it's that same sort of, I don't know, to use that axiom, right? It's when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? If all you think about are expressions, then everything's going to look like something you solve with expressions, which is not necessarily great either. I think versatility is helpful and it's useful. I don't know. Where's your break-even point on this thing, Kyle?
Yeah, I was looking real quick for, I actually address some of these thoughts in a presentation that I've given before, but I'll just do it off the cuff here. Anytime that you're using expressions, even very simple ones, to some degree, you're creating a rig, right? And the question of whether or not to create a rig is always sort of like, how much is the trouble worth? If, like you said, a lot of times it's just, if you need to do the thing once and you can just do it with keyframes, just do that. And I saw a couple people in the chat reinforcing that message. But if you need to do the thing 10 times, it very well might be worth starting to set up, do you need to do the thing 10 times, but each one in a different color? Or with a different, text in it or something? That's when you need to start thinking about, what are the pieces that you're going to be manipulating? Which ones are sort of a constant and which ones are going to change? And then that can kind of help you think about the way that you need to build it to be able to do those in the easiest way possible. And that said, sometimes maybe those 10 versions, just duplicating the composition and, retyping the thing, that may be the easiest because you're going to have to duplicate it to name your exports anyway or something. So, it kind of just is something that you come with experience. I won't pretend that I've never gone down a rabbit hole and built a complicated expressions rig for something that maybe I should have just done manually.
Yeah, well, I think you and I are also similar on that, right? That expressions presents a puzzle. You want to solve that puzzle. Oh, now you're spending time playing with your puzzles instead of doing your works.
Sure.
This is a fun thing to procrastinate on. Sure, why not? But yeah, hopefully that kind of sheds some thoughts on that. It really is kind of a case by case. You got to make that evaluation kind of thing. So we'll kind of see where that goes. The next one, just because we've been looking at our faces for too long, let's do something a little bit more technical. We've got this one from Reggio, who's asking, when you have a lot of shapes to animate and a lot of other mats, etc., how do you keep up with them? So this is kind of a bit of an organizational trub that comes up a lot. I run into it most in kind of compositing based problems, not so much when I'm dealing with shape layers as much, but sometimes you need I need 20 of the same mat to be in play out here. Also, Kyle, I found out what was wrong with your audio. I had it duplicated because I'm a dum-dum. That's classic oopsie. So yeah, I'm just gonna throw my screen up here, and we're gonna see what we can do. So the main question here is, they mentioned mats specifically, so I'm probably gonna just kind of glom onto that idea. Too many mats. Too many mats. So if you have too many mats, why did I have white backgrounds? What a weird. I guess I was being a real weirdo yesterday. So let's say you've got some mats, and you're going to need some mats out there. And if we're working with shape layers, this is going to make a lot more sense. So some of you could probably already know, if you can call out what's about to happen, you just let me know. But there's kind of a delay on the thing, so we probably won't know. Let's say that this is going to be the mat. This is the thing that's going to be defining what can and can't be seen. And then another thing over here, and this is going to be the stuff. And so the stuff, the good stuff, the things that we want to be matted, etc. And as you can tell, it's just so wonderful, these circles. So basically, you want this one to bite a hole out of that one, right? So if you were going to do this with your old mats, you would just use track mat, right? You might use the alpha mat so that the stuff can only be seen when it goes inside the mat, or you might use alpha inverted, in which case it's creating a cool eclipse. But if we were to make a lot of copies of this, you would end up with one mat for every one stuff, which is not what we want necessarily. Instead of using that kind of a situation, we could instead use an effect. I'll just get my windows organized. And it is, of course, called the set mat effect. So we're just going to drop the old set mat effect on the stuff, and we're going to have it look at the mat. And now we're just going to poke out that mat's eye. And now we're doing exactly the same thing, but we can have many layers reference the same mat layer using the set mat effect. And we just put the same set mat effect on a bunch of other things. So now I can literally cut down the number of layers we need by many. We can do that many times. Another way that kind of calls out to me all the time, especially with mats, is should you instead be using the old blend modes, the stencil alphas, stencils, lumas, etc. So I'll just take these, and let's just remove all those effects. Whoa, it's so crazy. We just go to this mat here, and we say, I'm going to use you as a stencil alpha. Ooh, now I'm going to use maybe a silhouette alpha. Oh, so you can use one layer on the top to cut holes in the ones underneath, and then you would probably pre-compose to keep all of this stuff, kind of where it goes. But that's kind of my thoughts when it comes to dealing with too many mats. Mm-hmm. How about you, Kyle? What do you got to help this person organize their life?
So something I don't have necessarily something for you to watch, but more a concept that I want you to think about.
Okay.
A thing that I've started doing a lot with my mats is incorporating master properties into my matting setups. Because especially with something that I'm potentially going to show in a minute based on some of the other questions I'm seeing, it's fairly trivial to set up a couple of switches or even just feed yourself opacity controls where you can turn some layers on and off. And so you might think about structuring things in a way where you can push a pre-comp and then be able to enable like a mat or kind of the main thing that you want. And you could use a couple copies of that thing to be the mat for itself for other things, but it's all sort of still controlled within one place, if that makes sense.
Right. And I mean, also, I see people in the chat talking about things like the if-else versus the switch statement is coming up. And there are a lot of ways. I mean, whenever I think about expressions, it's all about which is going to be the most optimized, and you start to really get a little bit nerdy with this stuff, or we end into like the try expression. I don't know if this is one that you go to a lot, but this idea of like try and catch is a little bit different from if-else. Because with the if-else, I think if-else is the heaviest one, right? Is that true?
Potentially, because it has to be checking for conditions.
Yeah, because it's always checking all of them. Whereas with the try, it doesn't, right? Because if that thing is not true, it forgets about the middle part if I'm remembering that correctly. So
Something like that.
in those ways, you know, we're thinking about optimization. That's the roughest one. But yeah, hopefully that is helpful. I don't know.
A helpful thing to point out here is that the set mat effect, which is really helpful, but it does have some quirks, and that like there are some layers it doesn't work as well with, because if you have changed the transform properties of your layer, set mat doesn't necessarily see those. And so another tip is there is a transform effect that can do a lot of the same things that the layer's transform properties can do, but then that can be made to work in conjunction with something like set mat sometimes. So that's another way to work with those.
Yeah, and it can get very wacky when you have your collapse transformations going on layers, when things are frame relative versus comp relative. It can be a mess. It can get into but the ideal situation when it's shape layer on shape layer violence is just to, because that'll get you there, because that works perfectly every time, because it's vector information, it's perfect to the frame, it's, you know, there's no confusion. But when you start, let's mix in some pixel things, let's mix in some footage, let's get some comps in there, then things are going to get real wacky real fast, and you're going to have to pay attention to what's happening with what. All right. So hopefully that helps. Let us know if it's helpful or not, though. Definitely, please call us out if we did not answer the question good. Then do let us know. But what else we got going? What is there anything in the list that stands out to you, Kyle, that we're looking at?
Well, the Jacob's question is what kind of spurred a lot of the discussion that I've been seeing in the chat here. So I mean, I have a couple of potential good answers for that.
Yeah, and Jacob's asking, what is a relatively easy but lesser known expression you think is really useful for beginners with little expression experience? Well, let's cut over to Kyle's screen and see what he's got.
Okay. I have maybe a couple answers here, because there's a few that I think people maybe don't always know about, and they can be a huge help. The first one I'm going to talk about, I did see a lot of discussion about if-else, and it's down here. This is an official expressions presentation that I have given before. I think value is one that a lot of people don't realize exists, and it can make a huge difference in terms of the way that this works. So right here, I have this white one as my mover, and this red one is following that, okay? I'm just going to click back off of this. These are two totally independent shapes. If you just pick whip these together like this, using this property pick whip, I can just tell it, hey, do everything that one does. And that's great, but it's exactly what that one does, right? So I could edit this with some math and say like plus, 100, and that's fine. But if you want this to work a little bit more like layer parenting, you can say value plus, and then that pick whip. And now you can still move this layer independently. And most importantly, you can keyframe this value. It's a little wonky the way you'll see the motion path, but it will follow this other layer, but still be able to be totally independent here, okay? And this, of course, works in I think every property, not just position, but this is a very crucial thing to understand, because even if you're just pick whipping properties together, you can still have independent control over things like this.
Right, and I think this is maybe one of the biggest confusions that I've seen in expressions is the idea of when is the keyframe dominant, when is the expression dominant. But there's an order to things. There's an order to all things. And that one thing happens, and then the other thing happens, and then the third thing happens. It's like, it's kind of like with layers, right? There's a layer priority of like mask, effect, and so on.
Officially called the order of operations.
Boom. Also a pretty dope track. Please look up order of operations. I will not rap it at you. But yeah, so sorry, just to kind of just to jump in there. But what else? No. What else is on your list? What else is?
Yeah.
is bringing it in.
You know what? I forgot I had this. This is a great example right here. This little rig that I use all the time, and it's a good example for value. So on scale right here, let's say you've already set, some little poppy keyframes, and you're like, oh man, but I need to make the thing like 80% that size. You could create a slider control. And then if you do an expression right here that says value times, because scale can be a multiplier here, and I'm going to do a parentheses times this thing divided by 100, just so that I don't have to have weird numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And now this is effectively my scale setting, but I can still retain those keyframes that I had. So that's a nice little handy use case for something like that.
Yeah, and so again, it's that idea that value, we're referencing values held in the keyframes. So they're waiting there for us to make use to modify them in some way of the expression that comes after and is being applied on them. And then some expressions would overwrite whatever that says.
Right, absolutely.
Because if you didn't have the value in there, it would just overwrite whatever's going on. But value means what's going on in the keyframes. So
what's going on?
What's going on?
Well, I saw a lot of discussion of if-else. It is a complicated one, but let me see if I can kind of very quickly throw this in here.
Break it down.
And then there's 2 people in the chat who have excellent longer tutorials on this, so I'll just plug those. So look, very quickly.
We're not lazy, guys. We're efficient. So
we're efficient.
Yeah.
So if-else allows you to tell a property, if a certain condition is met, then do this. Otherwise, do something different or stay the same or whatever. So they get written like this if you're being proper, like this if you're being sort of sloppy, or if it's a shorter one. So to show this in practice, a checkbox is probably the easiest way to do this. So you can add a checkbox control. They're just here, effect, expression controls, checkbox. And if you want to have, say, a layer's opacity be dependent on a checkbox here, okay? I can create an expression here, and let's just do a quick, I'm going to create a variable called checkbox, and then just drive it to that checkbox. And the way these work is they're just a binary on-off. So off is 0, and on is 1. This is very relevant in a minute here in 2 different ways. So I've established this variable called checkbox. And now I need to say if checkbox equals, it's a double equal sign. That's just a logical equal. So that's the way code works. Equals 1. And then you got to do these curly braces now. If you're on an older version of After Effects or using the old expressions engine, you don't. Else 0. So this says if that checkbox is 1, is on, then this value is 100. Else be 0. Okay, and so right now it's off, so the A disappeared, and then I can set this to on, and the A toggles on and off. Now, this is great, but you'll notice that's pretty rigid right now. Maybe I don't want this to be 100. Maybe I want it to be whatever I set that opacity value to earlier, in which case we'd go to value. Look at that, coming back already. So now it's an on-off switch, but I can still turn the opacity up or down here, okay? Also, bonus content. Remember how I said this is just a 1 or a 0? You could also just say value times, if you're just doing a simple on-off like this, value times that checkbox, because anything times 0 is 0, and anything times 1 is itself.
Boom.
Da-da-da.
So while you were talking about, the exactly equals to that equals thing, we call these bad boys some logical operators a lot of the times.
Oh, and I totally have those.
You got a slide for this? Okay.
There we go.
Thank goodness. I was frantically Googling it to bring them up. So with this logical language, I guess we'll go to the 2-shot so I can make animated hand gestures. With these kind of logical operators, oh no, we should go back to Kyle's screen so you can actually read the operators. What am I doing? You can describe fairly complex things using logic. If this but not that, greater than, equal to, but lower than, and you can start to combine them to say, well, if a value is bigger than this but smaller than this, and you end up with these sliding, overlapping, Booleaning logical values. Now, this will really bake your potato, right? If you think about it too hard, your potato is going to go in the microwave for 10 minutes and it's going to be totally crispified. But this is the language of expressions. Logic is the language of expressions, and I guess technically JavaScript is the language of expressions.
Yes.
But
Officially, yes.
yeah. But just like learning any language, it gets more comfortable the more you use it. So if you start small with where's the bathroom and, it's where's the library, dos cervezas, por favor, you're going to eventually build up to more complex sentences and complex ideas that are going to really help you out. And one of the troubles is that the computer is not going to give you a lot of feedback on it. Hey, your syntax is a little bit off. It's just going to be, here's the error, you did bad.
It's either good or it doesn't work.
That's right. But because we've moved over to JavaScript and true JavaScript, you're able to find so many resources. There's almost no Java problem that hasn't already been had. So rather than limiting yourself to only certain forums, here we go. Here's an oldie but a goodie, folks.
I commonly joke, although it's not really a joke, that every expressions question I've ever had, Dan Eberts solved it 15 years ago.
This guy's on every forum. He is. Is he still active on forums?
Yeah, totally.
Because I've seen what is it, 2019? Oh boy, it's crazy. These problems are not hyper unique. They may be very niche, but if you break them down to their component parts, you're going to find the solutions to that. And that's really all that the troubles that come with expressions. So yeah, hopefully that's good expression talk. I think hopefully people are getting something.
I wanted to do a quick, I said I would do a quick plug here. And Jake, who is here on the stream, actually has a really great if-else video. It's about half an hour long, 24 minutes long. That goes real deep into if-else. So this would be a great resource.
Mm-hmm. It's all the joy of hanging out with Jake for half an hour, but it's only about this.
Euchromedia, who's also here in the stream, has a course that's all about learning expressions, which I would also recommend. So, and it goes into if-else as well as many other things. So those would both be great resources if you want to learn more about this specific expression. Jake has some other ones as well. And if you want a more comprehensive course, that's a great one here.
Yeah. Boom. See, we do plug things. we do it.
So much teeth and hair, Jake.
Eyes and teeth. It's important. Perfect. So let's jump into some of these other. We have some more soft questions in here. We would say some less technical things building up in the old question box. But hey, we're hanging out here for another 10-15 minutes. So if you have more questions, do let us know in the chat. If you're coming in late, if you missed a lot of this will be archived. I'm going to try to cut off that early part where it's you and I talking over the music, but we'll see if we get there. So we've got some questions. This is one from Rathor, and there are two of them that are fairly similar. I think he or they reposted them just to kind of go and rebump it. So they're new to motion graphics. They've learned a lot from yourself and myself, Kyle. And their question is, how do you know what to do? So you're able to figure out how to do something, but what should you be doing? How do you train your mind on deciding what to do when you're confronted with, this is sort of a existential creative crisis, right?
Absolutely.
That there is plenty of technical knowledge in the world. There is plenty of information about sort of what's going on. Or if I can think about what I want to achieve, I can get there, right? I can Google it up. I can Google people who have had the same problem. I can figure out how to fake a 2D whatever. But how do I know what is the thing to do? And I think this goes back to when we talk about taste versus technical ability, when we talk about a lot of things that are far more subjective. we start to get into that art design space. So Kyle, how do you know what to do?
I mean, I often don't, but here are some of my here's some of my suggestions from that I've just figured out, mostly the hard way here.
You heard it here first. Kyle doesn't know what he's doing.
I honestly don't. That's the secret, right?
The secret is conceptualizing things and putting it into the universe. I'll forward you my copy.
Perfect. I'd say first and foremost, figure out something that you care about or are interested in, because making something just for the sake of making something, if you don't care about it, you're probably not going to be as into it. So it can be a totally personal project, just like maybe you saw an interesting leaf on your walk, or you want to do something about like a picture that your kid made, or like whatever it is that's interesting, a political cause, something like that. Figure out something that you like, and then what is even just a very short, give yourself like just a little bite-sized 5-second chunk. Like, what is a 2-part thing that I can say about this concept? And now you already have like a beginning and an end, maybe, right? So that could be your original piece of a little personal project that, if you just feel the need to make something, but you don't know what, certainly you can always just like play around with tools. But if you don't have some kind of objective, then I feel like you're always going to be kind of unsatisfied with it. I also have this website that is kind of good if you just absolutely don't know what to do. It's mitchgoldstein.com. He has this little side page called Obstructions, and it's he teaches art and design at Rochester Institute of Technology, as you may not be able to read there. He built this little thing where it just auto-generates a couple of boundaries for you. Boundaries are really helpful, because if it's just like, well, I'll make a thing with no limits, you're never going to make the thing. But these may or may not be, what you want, but you can reload this thing as many times as you want. It's kind of a nice, if you're just like, I want to make something, and maybe you've picked a technique, but you don't know what to make it for, something like this, where you just kind of get randomized ideas. In this case, make it with glue. For motion design, maybe that's not as relevant, but general creative project, like, could you make a project entirely out of glue? Totally. Maybe you could use CC glue gun in After Effects and make some really cool stuff. I don't know what do it selfishly means, but and then make it ridiculous. Like something like this, it just gives you a little starter. Might be a nice catalyst.
Yeah, and so I was going to say that's very similar to the Brian Eno oblique strategies prompts, right? It's really in that same vein of, here's some randomness, now I'm going to make something out of it. This is an interesting kind of quandary, a creative quandary that people get into when there's no stakes and there's nothing on the line. Then it's very hard because you're in a void. Often, though, you are under a time pressure, you have a goal, you have a deadline, right? This is where we go back to that NASA idea of you got to work the problem. That's where I come at from this. And if you don't have a problem, go get one. There's plenty of problems. So when you're talking about find a cause, that's great. You find something you're interested in, make that your problem, make that your goal. That's where you're going to drive towards. And often it's going back to the brief and figuring that out rather than maybe something ethereal will bonk me in the head. Work the problem. It's all right there. Who's the audience? What do they respond to? Let's pick some colors. Let's test some things. Working the problem is way more efficient because you're going to see things you don't like, things you do like. We're going to gravitate towards this. We're going to gravitate away from that. So in those ways, it can be very beneficial to start putting crap out there. And I mean crap, because you're going to reject a lot of it early, right? But in terms of knowing what strategies to take, which direction to go, it can be very daunting. I think it's daunting in any early endeavor when you're new to things, because everything is new, everything is untested, and you really have to take a little leap of faith, challenge yourself into areas. I'm comfortable using shape layers in these ways only. All right, well, can I accomplish my goal with that specific tool set that I have? No, what do I need outside of it? usually we run into this problem early on in the process where it's like, well, we're going to make a script. We're going to go to an AV script. How do I come up with ideas for that? If the raw question is, how do I have ideas? I'm going to level with you. I have no idea, right? And again, it's, well, where does it need to come from? And I talk about this a bit in some of the tutorials where we talk about writing for motion design or just more nebulous, larger meta problems where you really want to start with what you know and work backwards. You don't have to make things linearly. You can start in the middle and go backwards and forwards. You can start at the end and work your way back. If this was an advertisement, you'd start with the messaging and work your way backwards. Not everything is narrative. Not everything is linear. Some things are abstract and weird. So part of that, I think, is also removing the pressure on yourself. So there's the two environments that we're really talking about, right? The commercial and then the personal. And, in the personal things, then it's a little bit more nebulous. You just got to find yourself, Kyle. You got to find your voice. Find your voice as an artist. And this sounds a little bit silly sometimes when you say it, but when you see people who, they have a certain style, it's because that's the way they defaultly express themselves, right? So anyway, I don't know if that helps. Maybe that's really unhelpful. Maybe that's just a bunch of circular talking. I don't know, but maybe that's, I don't know. Anything else to jump in on that, Kyle?
No, I mean, I think that was well said, and I think that was a good way to kind of put some of the things I said in context.
And okay, we've got some more questions coming in also. I wonder because we've got some time to jump in on some things. I'm gonna see what's good. We've got this question about explain how keyframe velocity works and what does lock outgoing to incoming do. That's a little bit of a technical thing that we can jump into. And I love this idea of design with intent. So it's so good from JC, who's talking about this idea of intentionality. Just to go back to that idea of one of the biggest criticisms I have. A lot of people send me like a reel or whatever, and what do you think of this? I was like, well, I don't see a lot of intention there. That's the biggest thing that I have to say about it, is that it's a thing. It doesn't have a lot of reason or purpose behind it. So, I don't know what to say about it. It is what it is, And if there's no goals, I can't say whether it's effective or not. What's the purpose of this? Why is it here? Does it convince? Does it explain? Does it evoke an emotional reaction? Were you even trying to do those things? I don't know. And if I don't know, then maybe that's not good. I don't have a lot of art criticism to level at things. All I can say is this effective? Is this interesting? And if I can only answer half of that, then I can't really say a lot about a piece. But yeah, anyway, let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about keyframe velocity as we come into the terminal velocity of our program here. So let's. I guess I'll fire up.
You want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. Why not? Let's talk about velocities. So keyframe velocity. What it is, what it does, and all of these things that we work on during the program, we're going to just throw them up on the boards, on the Milla Note boards. If you want to check them out later, we might clean them up a bit to look a little nicer. But so we're gonna just make a little circle here, just because you need some velocity to talk about, and we're gonna change its position. And I'm going to say that velocity doesn't make a lot of sense on a lot of properties. What's the velocity of scale, right? What does that even mean? What is velocity? So we're looking at, speed over time, right? So maybe the speed graph is where this makes the most sense. And we can see here what is the keyframe velocity of this. So when we're looking at, I just smashed the audio button. I don't know why I did that. Oh, I'm a monster. Okay. So this is why I should not also be in charge of the boards. So here we have the keyframe velocity situation. And the incoming velocity is here rated at 33.333, blah, blah, blah. And the outgoing velocity, blah, 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 blah. What this means is that I can start adjusting these numbers. Let's put this one at 50 and let's put this one at 10. So now it looks kind of like that. So now you see the graph has made this shift like so, because I've altered these handles, right? Now, when we're saying continuous lock outgoing to incoming, well, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't change these handles at all. What it changes is this point. When I grab it and move it up and down, they're both locked together. When I grab this point and move it up and down, it looks to have split into 2 points. So the incoming velocity of this, it could go whoop, a boop. So we're going to see what that is. All right. So it's going to come over here. Pow! Well, that was not exciting. Hold on. So now this thing is going to move. It's going to come in, and then see that kick right there, like it's being punted. Punt. So that's because these are separated things, meaning at this exact moment in time, we've got this incoming that's slowing, and then this one doesn't necessarily have to be. We could jack this way up like so. So that's why we would uncouple these two things from each other if you wanted to do that kind of nuanced motion about these things. If you couple them together, it's going to be smooth, right? So you can see this is a smoother transition here. The movement doesn't stop. Right here. And really, we should be smoothing that also. This is actually really bothering me right there. Okay. That's nicer. So hopefully that explains kind of what that is and why that might be. We're going to cut back to our 2-shot here real quick. But hopefully that explains a little bit about what that incoming and outgoing velocity is all about and why that might be helpful. But yeah, hopefully that does it. But yeah, let's see. That pretty much brings us into the end of our time here. It's 2 o'clock my time.
We'll just ease into our outgoing velocity here, if you want.
Oh, maybe. Yes. Oh, such segues. We're so good. Yeah. We're the best at this show. And we're one of the only shows like it, so tell us we're not the best.
Deal with it.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Thank you for jumping on the Motion Design Hotline with us. Big thanks to Milla Note for sponsoring this stuff. If we didn't get to your questions, we've got them logged here in the Milla Note, so we might even get to them first thing next time. Thanks to everyone we see in the chat. There's a lot of folks that we've interacted with IRL as well. Definitely check them out. Check out all those links that Kyle was telling you about. If you forget them, just rewatch the stream and you'll get them. Or check out our notes in the Milla Note interface where you can enjoy. You gotta get those show notes. They're so good. But that's pretty much it. I'm Evan Abrams. Thank you all so much for watching. Kyle, anything to say here at the end of the show?
I don't know if I have any huge words of wisdom or anything.
Well, you could also just replug the things in case people missed it at the middle.
I've already forgotten. I'm going to have to rewatch the episode.
And you should too. Kyle's going to be at Blend. If you're going to Blend, get in touch, hang out. Follow Kyle at Kylesaurus Rex. Follow Evan Abrams at EC Abrams. Thanks again, everyone, for coming.
Since I'll be at Blend, that means I won't be here next week. So I know that makes you very sad.
Spoiler. Yeah, that's true. Next time, there's going to be no Kyle. It might be 2 Evans. It might be Evan and a mystery guest. We don't know what's going to happen. You got to tune in to find out. It's crazy. But yeah, thanks again, and everybody have a great day, and we will see you around the internet. Now I have to find the stop.